Some stories should stay buried, but sometimes the ones we dig up refuse to stay down. When Stephen King penned Pet Sematary, even he admitted it was the darkest thing he had ever written. His wife and publisher urged him to lock it away. He almost did, but like the dead in its pages, the story clawed its way back, and in 1989, it reached the screen. Pet Sematary isn't just a horror movie, it's an existential scream wrapped in the scent of wet soil and grief. A film where the real monster isn't death, it's denial. And it left audiences disturbed not by what they saw, but by what they felt long after the credits rolled. Behind the foggy woods and children's chants, something else was buried, a cursed production, terrifying coincidences, and choices so bold they nearly ended the film before it began. It's a story of loss, obsession, and the terrifying price of resurrection. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Pet Sematary. 1989. Truths the studio buried, but that never stayed dead for long. Fact number 1. Stephen King tried to bury the story, literally. Before Pet Sematary became a film, it almost never became a book. Stephen King wrote it in a flurry, inspired by a real road outside his rented home in Orrington, Maine, where trucks would speed by and, eventually, kill his daughter's cat. That cat, named Smucky, was buried in a homemade pet cemetery built by neighborhood kids. But the book King wrote from that trauma frightened even him. His wife, Tabitha, called the manuscript too cruel. His publisher said it would damage his career. King shelved it. For years, it remained unpublished until he needed to fulfill a final obligation to Doubleday. Reluctantly, he handed it over. It became a bestseller. But here's the twist. King now says Pet Sematary was the only book he's written that genuinely scared him. So the question is, when even the author is haunted by his own words, should we have read them at all? Fact number 2. The real Pet Sematary wasn't just a set. In the film, the children's cemetery, with its creepy totems and hand-carved signs, looks like Hollywood set design. But it wasn't fiction. The production built it in Maine, not far from King's own home, and the ground they used had a history. Before cameras rolled, several crew members reported strange equipment, malfunctions, lights that died for no reason, mics picking up voices no one heard. Some even refused to work night shifts there. Rumors swirled that the land had once been part of native burial grounds. Others said the cemetery had a reputation long before the film arrived. The production designer, Mary Lambert, leaned in. She encouraged actors to treat the space with reverence, but by then, it was too late. The atmosphere had already shifted. Cursed location or just method acting run amok? Would you film a horror movie on land locals call unquiet soil? Fact number 3. The death of Gage was too real for Hollywood. One of the most disturbing scenes in Pet Sematary is the tragic death of toddler Gage, struck by a speeding truck in broad daylight. It wasn't just the premise, it was how real it looked. Critics called it unflinching, traumatic, even irresponsible. The child actor, Miko Hughes, was only 2 years old. So how did they do it? Mary Lambert used clever editing, body doubles, a child-sized dummy, and sharp sound design. But some shots, like the moment Gage's shoe rolls into the road, were so emotionally charged that test audiences gasped and a few walked out. The studio wanted to tone it down. Lambert refused. She later explained, "It had to feel wrong, that's the point." But this raises a deeper question. Is there a limit to how real grief should look on screen, especially when a child is at the center of it? Fact number 4. The actor playing Judd had seen death far too much of it. Fred Gwynne, who portrayed the kind but doomed neighbor Judd Crandall, was best known for playing Herman Munster, a goofy, Frankenstein-like dad in the sitcom The Munsters. Casting him in a dark, tragic role seemed absurd to some, but Gwynne's performance stunned critics. There was a reason. He wasn't acting. In real life, Gwynne had buried 2 of his own children, one to drowning, one to a brain tumor. He carried that grief into every scene, especially the ones involving loss, regret, and death's high cost. You can see it in his eyes when he says, "Sometimes dead is better." That wasn't just dialogue, it was a confession. Ironically, it became his final great role. He died a few years later, refusing most interviews. He never spoke publicly about Pet Sematary again. So here's the question. Was it brilliant casting or emotional exploitation of a man who'd already suffered enough? Fact number 5. The Zelda scenes were never meant to be this disturbing. Ask any fan what haunted them most about Pet Sematary, and many will skip the supernatural. They'll name Zelda, Rachel's twisted, dying sister, confined to a bed and suffering from spinal meningitis, appears in flashbacks and hallucinations. But here's the kicker. Zelda wasn't played by a woman. She was portrayed by a man, Andrew Hubatsek. The director chose a male actor to avoid any hint of cliché, believing a male body would create a more unnatural silhouette. The result was horrifying, gaunt, inhuman, exaggerated. Lambert herself admitted she had nightmares after filming. Audiences screamed in theaters. Some even thought it was achieved through special effects, but it was just makeup and trauma. So we ask, did Pet Sematary cross a line by turning a real disease into psychological horror, or was it a masterclass in fear without monsters? Fact number 6. A fire nearly burned the entire production to ashes. Midway through filming, disaster struck. A fire broke out near the production's storage and staging area in Maine. Equipment melted, costumes were destroyed, crew members scrambled to save what they could. At one point, flames nearly reached a truck holding exposed film reels, including the scene where Gage returns home. No official cause was determined. Some said faulty wiring, others claimed sabotage, but a few whispered it was the land. Stephen King, ever the pragmatist, dismissed the rumors. But Mary Lambert wasn't so sure. She later said, "It felt like something didn't want the story told." Ultimately, the footage was spared but barely. So, coincidence, cursed shoot, or poetic justice from the dead? Would this film have gained more power if it had been lost in flames? Fact number 7. The cat playing Church had a double life. Church, the family's cat, is one of the film's most iconic images. Glowing eyes, matted fur, a creature returned from the grave, somehow wrong. But the unsettling realism behind Church wasn't just acting, it was logistic. The production didn't use one cat, they used 7. Each feline was trained for a specific behavior, walking across the road, lying still, hissing, leaping. Animal trainers rotated them seamlessly, applying makeup and colored contact lenses when needed. But one cat, nicknamed Blinky, kept running off set. Locals in Maine started seeing him around town, lounging in diners or riding on trucks. He'd disappear for days, then casually return. He became a small-town legend, the cat that died and came back, again and again. So we ask, is it fitting or disturbing that even the fake church wouldn't stay buried? Fact number 8. Mary Lambert had to fight the studio tooth and nail. Mary Lambert wasn't the studio's first choice. A music video director known for her work with Madonna, she was seen as inexperienced in horror. But King insisted. He'd been impressed by her visual instincts. Still, Paramount pushed back. They wanted a male director. They wanted to tone down the death. They wanted to rewrite the ending. Lambert refused. She fought for the Gage storyline to remain intact, for Judd's death to be unflinching, and for Rachel's final scene to be ambiguous and grotesque. The studio relented, but not easily. Lambert later recalled, "They thought it was too much. I thought it wasn't enough." Today, she's credited with crafting one of the most emotionally devastating horror films of the decade. But it leaves us wondering, would Pet Sematary have survived if it hadn't been told by someone unafraid to go too far? Fact number 9. The original ending was even darker. In the theatrical cut, Louis buries his wife Rachel in the cursed ground, and she returns rotting, broken, whispering his name just before the screen cuts to black. It's chilling, but it wasn't the original plan. The first version ended one scene earlier. Rachel returns, unseen. Louis hears the door open. A cold hand touches his shoulder. Cut to black. It was subtle, psychological, but test audiences hated it. They wanted shock. They wanted gore. So the studio demanded reshoots, and Rachel's gruesome reappearance was filmed weeks later. Stephen King preferred the original, Lambert preferred the new. The debate still lingers. So we ask, is subtle horror more terrifying than graphic horror, or are we too addicted to blood to feel real fear anymore? Fact number 10. The screenplay was written by Stephen King himself, and he broke his own rules. Stephen King rarely writes the screenplays for his own books. After bad experiences with adaptations, he often prefers to let others handle the translation to film. But Pet Sematary was different. He wrote the entire screenplay himself, and he made changes. Some were small, like trimming subplots. Others were bigger. The film's pacing was tighter, more brutal. King condensed grief into blunt force trauma. And perhaps most surprising of all, he added a scene that wasn't in the book, the final kiss between Louis and the resurrected Rachel, drenched in blood. It was a choice that polarized fans. Some called it gratuitous, others called it poetic horror. So here's the deeper question. Should authors rewrite their own nightmares, or are some stories better left in their original, raw form? Fact number 11. Miko Hughes didn't understand what he was filming, and that was the point. 2-year-old Miko Hughes played Gage Creed with eerie precision, smiling one moment, stabbing the next. But here's the unsettling truth. He didn't understand any of it. The crew carefully shielded him from the story's context. Props were made of rubber. Blood was just syrup. He thought he was in a game. The scariest scenes were filmed out of sequence, with adults reacting in ways he didn't comprehend, Lambert said. The key was to let Miko act naturally and build the horror around him. The result? A toddler who doesn't know he's playing a murderer, making his performance all the more chilling. But it raises a moral dilemma. Should filmmakers use a child's innocence to amplify terror without them ever knowing what they're part of? Fact Hasson 2. The soil in the film was imported because local dirt wasn't dead enough. This sounds absurd, but it's true. The production imported truckloads of dirt to create the perfect burial ground. The native main soil was too light, too clean. It didn't look ancient or ominous enough on camera. So the art department found soil with darker tone and richer texture. They mixed it with peat moss, added rocks, and raked it to look disturbed but not fresh. They even experimented with the color of mud on the actors' hands and shoes. Lambert insisted, "This isn't just dirt, it's sacred, cursed ground. It has to look wrong." It worked. Audiences still talk about how the ground itself felt like a character. But then again, if you have to fake cursed earth, does that make the curse more or less real? Fact number 13. One actor had to be hypnotized to get through her scenes. Denise Crosby, who played Rachel Creed, had acted in horror before, but Pet Sematary pushed her limits. The scenes with Zelda, her deformed, dying sister, were so disturbing that Crosby began having panic attacks on set. She admitted in interviews that the makeup, the sound design, and the psychological intensity caused her to dissociate. One day, she froze mid-scene and couldn't continue. The director brought in a therapist who used light hypnosis to help her disassociate emotionally during filming and step back in afterward. It worked, but Crosby said she never fully shook the dread. Even years later, she couldn't watch the Zelda scenes. So we ask, what's the real cost of horror when actors must unlearn fear just to survive their roles? Fact number 14. A fan theory suggests Gage never came back alone. Among hardcore fans, there's a theory that Gage's return from the burial ground isn't just unnatural, it's demonic. According to this view, the cursed soil doesn't simply reanimate bodies, it invites something else in. In the film, Gage's behavior after resurrection is unnerving, not just violent, but calculating. He mimics Judd's voice, he sets traps, he speaks with vocabulary he shouldn't know. Some fans believe he's possessed by the Wendigo, a Native American spirit of hunger and madness, referenced subtly in King's original novel. The film never confirms this, but it never denies it either. So here's the chilling thought. What if Gage didn't just come back wrong? What if Gage never came back at all? Fact number 15. The film was almost rated X over one 5-second shot. The original cut of Pet Sematary pushed the limits of the MPAA. It wasn't the gore, it was a brief, brutal moment. Gage, now undead, slices Judd's Achilles tendon from under the bed. The shot was only 5 seconds long, but it caused an uproar. Test audiences squirmed. Some left the theater. The MPAA threatened to give the film an X rating, which would kill its commercial release. Paramount insisted the scene be cut. Mary Lambert refused. She argued the horror came from implication, not exploitation. After weeks of negotiation, the shot stayed but with one frame trimmed, just enough to avoid the dreaded rating. Today, it remains one of the most viscerally remembered moments in horror history. So we ask, if fear lingers in the mind more than the eye, why do 5 seconds still haunt us decades later? Fact number 16. The crew left an offering before shooting the cemetery scenes. Before filming the key scenes at the burial ground where Louis buries Church, Gage, and eventually Rachel, several crew members asked the production team if they could perform a small ritual. Not for publicity, for protection, they brought flowers, burned sage, and whispered prayers into the wind. Some left coins or strands of hair, others just stood silently, shoes off, hands in their pockets. Mary Lambert didn't object. In fact, she encouraged it. It gave us focus, she said. It reminded us we were dealing with grief, not just ghosts. To the studio, it was superstition. To the crew, it was insurance. So what do you think? Was it just a respectful gesture, or did they know something we didn't? Fact number 17. The truck driver scene hit a little too close to reality. The moment when toddler Gage is struck by a massive semi-truck is one of the most horrifying in the film, not because of gore, but because of how ordinary it feels. The driver, distracted by music, doesn't see Gage until it's too late. That truck? It was real. The driver? A local Mainer hired for authenticity. But here's the chilling twist. The man had lost a child in a similar accident years earlier. He never spoke about it publicly, but the crew said he wept after the scene was shot just once and never mentioned it again. He delivered the most tragic scene in horror by reliving his own. So the question lingers, is authenticity worth it when the pain behind it never truly heals? Fact number 18. Stephen King appears in the film, but not where you'd expect. King has made cameos in many of his adaptations, Maximum Overdrive, It, Creepshow, but in Pet Sematary, his appearance is more than just fan service. He plays the minister presiding over Missy Dandridge's funeral, a small, somber role. But behind the scenes, it was deeply personal. Missy, the maid who dies by suicide, was based on a real person King knew. She suffered silently from cancer and financial despair. King felt her story had been erased. Including her in the film and delivering her eulogy himself was his way of honoring her. He later said, "That was the hardest scene I ever filmed." So we ask, when the storyteller steps into the story, is it ego or grief trying to find a voice? Fact number 19. The studio considered a happy ending just in case. Believe it or not, Pet Sematary almost had an alternate ending. Test audiences in early screenings found the finale too bleak. Executives at Paramount panicked. They proposed a new final scene. Rachel returns, but normal. No gore, no decay. Just a tearful reunion. Fade to black. Lambert refused. She argued it destroyed the entire thesis of the film that death is irreversible and playing God comes at a cost. It would turn tragedy into fantasy, she said. And that's not horror, it's denial. But for a moment, there was a version of this film where nobody died permanently. So we ask, would Pet Sematary still haunt us if it had offered comfort instead of consequence? Fact number 20. The ground is sour and it followed them home. After filming wrapped, cast and crew reported strange after effects. Fred Gwynne said his dreams were darker, more vivid. Denise Crosby claimed her sleep patterns changed. One camera assistant suffered a sudden health scare weeks after returning home. The most unsettling detail? Mary Lambert began writing letters by hand late at night, addressed to no one. She later said she didn't remember writing them. No proof, no evidence, just echoes. But many in the production admitted Pet Sematary left a mark. So we end where it began. If sometimes dead is better, what happens when you keep digging anyway? 2 bonus fact. Stephen King buried the novel right next to his child's bedroom. Before Pet Sematary terrified moviegoers, it haunted Stephen King's house. When he first drafted the manuscript in 1979, King placed it in a drawer, unpublished, unread, intentionally forgotten. But the drawer wasn't just anywhere. It sat in his study, directly next to his toddler son Owen's bedroom. For years, the most horrifying story King ever wrote slept just inches from his real child. He said he couldn't bring himself to move it. "It was like a loaded gun I kept under lock," he once explained. Too dark to destroy, too dangerous to release. The irony? That proximity, the line between fiction and family, became the very theme of Pet Sematary. A father who can't let go, a house full of ghosts, a choice buried too close to home. So maybe the horror was never in the woods. Maybe it was always in the hallway. Which of these facts disturbed you the most? Was it the fire, the hypnosis, or the way a father's grief bled into fiction and back again? Pet Sematary was never just about death. It was about the terrifying things we do to escape it. Tell us in the comments. Do you think the story is about resurrection or punishment? And what film should we exhume next? If you want more secrets that were never meant to see daylight, subscribe, and we'll keep digging.